Thanks, Miranda. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined by our panel of military and intelligence analysts. First, Skyping in tonight from Las Vegas, we're pleased to welcome retired Major General Robert Dees. General Dees currently serves as Dr. Ben Carson's campaign chairman. Some big things going on tonight in Nevada. Skyping in from Tampa, Florida, Colonel Derek Harvey. He's a former intelligence officer and was an advisor to General David Petraeus. Today, he's the director on the Global Initiative on Civil Society and Conflict at the University of South Florida. And also Skyping in from our nation's capital, former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz. Fred currently serves as Senior Vice President for Policy and Programs at the Center for Security Policy. Gentlemen, we really appreciate your time here on Newsmax Prime. General Dees, first to you. We mentioned this has been high on the president's list of priorities, but now, very late in his term, he is really trying to move forward with the closure of Gitmo. General, what's your reaction?
Well, my first reaction is this is an ideologically driven decision, just as many of the president's decisions have been. He tried to do this as a campaign promise, and then for 7 years. There's been a lot of good, reasonable objections to it, and so you would think after 7 years he would recognize that it's not a smart thing to do. I'm concerned that it sends the wrong message worldwide. I'm concerned that it places some of our battlefield participants at risk by putting terrorists back where they came from. And so I don't think it's a good idea at all.
Fred, up there in Washington, where you're hanging out these days, on the Senate floor today, the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, said it is illegal to transfer prisoners onto U.S. soil. So if that is in fact the case, isn't this a moot point? Should we interpret it as mere executive grandstanding?
I agree with that in part. House Armed Services Chairman Mac Thornberry said this plan looks like a press release. There wasn't much to it. I'm concerned, however, this president has gone around Congress so often, he may be thinking of using an executive order to bring these prisoners into the United States, and I think Congress has to be ready for that.
An executive order, executive action. Colonel Derek Harvey tonight down in Tampa. Why is this president so energized by, quote, using all legal tools to deal with the remaining detainees? Does he ever consider a downside domestically to protecting the American people?
Well, my major concern here, as it should be for the president, is the security issue. This is ultimately really about these terrorists. The people I talk to, both prosecutors and defenders of these detainees, and having reviewed many of the files in the past, what we know is that these are very dangerous people. And in fact, nearly 30% or more of those that have already been released have gone back into the fight. About 20% in direct combat, and many, many others supporting it, recruiting, helping develop social media. So that's the real challenge here about the problem today, and what are we going to do with these people in the future, because these wars are still going forward.
In fact, gentlemen, the president seems to insist that you called it war, and yet he is welcoming is the wrong word. He is advocating utilizing our federal court system as if we're trying criminals. Listen to what he said this morning.
Our Article 3 federal courts have proven to have an outstanding record of convicting some of the most hardened terrorists. These prosecutions allow for the gathering of intelligence against terrorist groups. It proves that we can both prosecute terrorists and protect the American people.
General Dees, he talks about Article 3 courts, but the notion of treating enemy combatants as criminals, that seems to be a very dangerous path and a slippery slope, does it not?
Of course. Well, you put your finger on it. These are not criminals. These are hardened terrorists. They have put Americans at risk or have actually killed Americans. They should be treated that way. Also, President Obama has a red herring. He'll say that this is a recruiting tool for other terrorists, and I think that's exactly wrong. He has that wrong, the way he had the Iran nuclear deal wrong, the way they had the Benghazi video wrong. His interpretation of the threat and of how to deal with the threat is totally skewed from what will truly protect the American people.
Protecting the American people, that's what's so troubling about this, Fred Fleitz. I mean, the president acknowledged this morning that this whole notion will, quote, scare Americans, but I want everybody to listen to what he said when he was trying to calm our fears.
I think a lot of the American public are worried about terrorism, and in their mind, the notion of having terrorists held in the United States rather than in some distant place can be scary. But part of my message to the American people here is we're already holding a bunch of really dangerous terrorists here in the United States because we threw the book at them. And there have been no incidents. We've managed it just fine.
Been no incidents, yet. Fred Fleitz, let me get you to do some intelligence analysis domestically. One of the spots they're talking about, the naval brig down in Charleston. I understand that's in close proximity to an elementary school. Are we playing with matches here or something worse?
Of course we are. And I think the issue that these would no longer be illegal combatants, they would be entitled to U.S. constitutional protections once they're on U.S. soil, meaning they would have access to lawyers, legal challenges to being held. Once we let these prisoners into the United States, they could possibly be released in the United States because they would have the protections of the U.S. Constitution. They would be able to challenge the conditions of how they were held, whether they were mistreated. The president has not thought this through. It is a terrible, terrible idea.
Colonel Harvey, since this all started, and let's be fair about it, some Republicans, John McCain comes to mind, talking about closing Gitmo several years ago, I offered what I called the Aleutian solution. In other words, take these folks, don't put them in the contiguous United States, but go to that chain of islands, the kind of American Siberia out there off Alaska, where we have the old listening posts we used in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Open those bases and let those enemy combatants sit up there and freeze rather than being in the tropics. Is there something to the notion of really putting them, quote, on ice? Derek, to you.
Well, I think that solves part of the problem, but it doesn't address the legal issues that we become encumbered with. It's been difficult enough to try people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the 9/11 bombing, even though we're using all the capabilities we have offshore in the court system, military tribunals in Guantanamo. So I think that is not a solution in and of itself, and it's not just about these 91 prisoners that are left. There will be more. And do we want those prisoners to be held in foreign countries, or do we want to bring them to a place where we control them and we can interrogate them and we can prosecute them? I think Guantanamo is a good place for them. We've invested in it. It is secure, and it allows us to move forward with the military tribunals. There's no reason to change what is effectively working today.
Let me turn to General Dees on a related subject, and that is picking our next president. There you are, hard at work for Dr. Ben Carson. Is Dr. Carson going to stay the course on past this caucus tonight?
Well, definitely he is. Dr. Carson is committed to the hundreds of thousands of followers around the country, and Dr. Carson sees himself rightly as a voice of we the people. And so although some of the other candidates would prefer him to fall out, this is a democratic process, and the democratic process should run its course rather than anyone trying to predetermine the outcome of an election in the United States.
Major General Robert Dees tonight from Las Vegas, Fred Fleitz from Washington, D.C., and retired Army Colonel Derek Harvey. Gentlemen, we very much appreciate your time tonight here on Newsmax Prime. And a reminder, following this broadcast, Newsmax TV coverage of the Nevada caucus, Ed Berliner will be behind the anchor desk. Our coverage starts immediately following this program at 9 p.m. Eastern.